Welcome to this week's edition of Headlines and Beyond. As I said, we're developing a new program here that will look at the headlines and then we'll go beyond into analysis. And you're going to see aspects of the news that you're not going to see anywhere else. We're going to do things and talk about things that you're not going to see on any other news broadcast. And this is because we're not simply looking at things from one particular point of view. We try to explore all the different points of view. And the news broadcast, the research doesn't stop at the end of one broadcast. It continues forward to the next broadcast. So in many ways, these are sort of interconnected broadcasts. Anyways, let's get on with the headlines. And it's for the, this is the weekend edition of week 48, 2014. And we were talking last time, we were talking about the politicians and publicans. These are the your bureaucracy. We're talking about biblical evil, how they are actually, that they are, they actually meet and still do meet the definition of biblical evil. And we were looking at a group of Republicans. We started off with looking at a group of Republicans. And I think they were called Young Americans for Freedom, and their website is www.yaf.org. And their particular beef was, I went on their website, and their particular beef was that the University of Virginia, what is it called? Yeah, no, not University of Virginia, Virginia Tech. Apparently, these have these student boards that hand out money to different student groups, and of course, you can be any type of group except for conservative, because of course, on most campuses are strongly left, they're strongly communist, which is kind of ironic because if these people were indeed communists, then going by the history of communism, they should be able to give up their high-end salaries and work for nothing, work for free. But this isn't the case. Most university professors have very nice homes. They certainly value their tenure. If you're a professor, you're teaching at a university. One of the things you want to go for, one of the accolades, one of the esteems that you want to achieve is tenure. And the tenure gives you your stature. You become that, the esteemed professor as a tenure professor. But the thing is if in communism, if everybody's supposed to be equal, and this is the sort of the rhetoric of communism, then this kind of goes against that. And you don't see any of these professors who say, "Oh yeah, I believe in communism." You don't see them giving up their own particular benefits for somebody else. You don't see them giving away their wealth to have, and as Michael Moore would put it, you have a pizza pie. Everyone needs to have a fair share of the pizza pie, right? Well, do you see Michael Moore doing this? He's got his wealth, he's got his money, make the money from him. Do you see him taking all the money he has and equally sharing with the people who made the movie, who did the engineering work, the different people who worked on it? And the same thing with the professors. Do you see the professors giving up their wealth on an equal basis to provide for others? And no. And so what happens is, this is the difference between rhetoric and reality. Rhetoric is what you say and talk about, and reality is what you're doing. And this makes these people hypocrites. But anyways, this is what this is sort of the view I have of socialism. And it was not a view I have. This is something that can be observed. This is something you observe. You don't see them giving their money away. They're talking about it, but they're not giving their money away. And you have you watch Warren Buffett or George Soros talking about how it doesn't matter if the rich pay a little bit more, but you look at what they actually did when they say, "Oh, it doesn't matter if the rich pay more in taxes." As they were saying this, they offshored all their money. So the amount of money that they could have gone after for George Soros and Warren Buffett was significantly less than what was actually there. So they were never offering their full value of their wealth. They were offering only a small token portion of their wealth to give up. They said, "Oh yeah, we can give up a little bit more." And the thing is they weren't doing this voluntarily. They didn't come up and say, oh, people should be giving more and voluntarily giving the money. They waited for the government to come and say, "Oh, this is what everyone else has to do. And so this becomes the reality of socialism. This becomes this sort of the reality of why the left never achieves what it intends to achieve or what its rhetoric is, and because it has no intention of doing so. But the thing is that the left, and I need to remind you here, that the left is simply the left. There's also the right to socialism, right? So there's a left part of socialism, which is known as communism. We often associate the left with socialism itself and sort of exempt the right and say, well, they're the nationalists and they're not really socialists. But if you look beneath the nationalist ideology, they're fundamentally socialist. They just have a different view of socialism. And the end result, again, both sides have rhetoric, but the end result is the same. The end result of socialism is a totalitarian dictatorship. So if you want a dictatorship where you're told exactly what to do, then you go for socialism. If you want independence, then you need to be an independent, not a socialist. And I'm actually an independent. I don't believe that any one party that you have, or that any one party should have particular power, or that I don't believe that any one party, I don't believe in belonging to a party or a particular group. I am what I am who I am, I like what I like, and that's it. I will not adjust these things to conform to a particular group or a peer grouping. I've never have. And that's kind of left me out of a lot of different things, and I've been asked to leave a lot of different groups, but you know what? I am who I am, and I like what I like, and that's about it. And the thing is, they're complaining about being denied funding. And ironically enough, if they were actually Republicans, and this is, where my argument comes in, is that why are they, if they're Republicans and they are against this socialized lifestyle of socialism, where handouts are given by the government, why are they relying on a governing board of students for funding? If you're an independent GOP person, you're an independent Republican, and you're against welfare, why are you accepting welfare? Why are you even applying for welfare? Don't complain about it. Raise money on your own. Raise your own independent funds. Well, that's not what we see here. As we see that that they're upset about this. But the thing is this: the Democrats show us their true colors, and show us the true colors of socialism. That socialism is fundamentally rhetoric. And then all I have to do is look at Earth Day and this whole thing of environmentalism. About a week to 2 weeks ago, we had a major cold snap across much of North America, and even Hawaii felt it, right? The headlines read, snow across the land. About 50% of the United States had snow on the ground. Tuesday, according to the National Weather Service, there was also forecast for heavy snow in the counties in Michigan, Vermont. All 50 states registered temperatures below freezing on Tuesday morning. This was a couple weeks ago. Even traditionally warm ones, temperatures at Mauna Kea, as in Hawaii, that's Hawaii's Big Island, dropped to 31 degrees, where Florida Panhandle was in the upper 20s. Right, so we got they have freezing warning effects across the country, and of course freezing is one of the characteristics of global warming. When the Earth is warming, what's going to happen? Earth is going to freeze. Does this ring any bells to you that say, wait a minute here, maybe the environmental argument is there's something wrong? If you're having record freezing, you're having this cold span, you have parts of the land freezing, then where's all this red coming from in these sort of NASA images? Until you go back and you look at the NASA images, and they're not real images. They're false color images. In other words, the photographs are statistically colored. In other words, they try to create these averages in these particular computer models, and these are the colors you're seeing in these sort of global warming maps. You're not seeing reality. As a matter of fact, if you go into the satellite data for NOAA, you will not find global warming at all. In other words, you only find global warming in the statistical and computer modeling studies done by the International Panel on Climate Change. It's only within these international groups, that these so-called think tanks, that you find global warming. And so once again, you see the difference on the left between reality and rhetoric. And the thing is, if you do not conform to their concept of reality, their rhetoric, because they're convinced that this is real, they hate you. The words that come out of their mouth are no longer tolerant, because they're only tolerant of people who accept their ideas. And so this is what leftism is all about. This is what socialism is all about. And then you'll find that the socialists on the left and the right, what they have in common is each are intolerant of each other's or of other people's opinions and ideas. You have to have tolerance for their ideas and their ideas alone. As soon as you don't have that, they're no longer tolerant, they're no longer welcoming, and what you'll end up seeing is you'll see, basically, they'll start attacking you. And so the thing is, the whole thing that the sort of, we're sort of this whole Virginia Tech thing, and this is sort of to give you an idea of where we go in terms of leftists, in terms of socialism. And this is where the United States is right now. And the United States is socially left. This is with Barack Obama, who's got a lot of communists, well-known communists, in his employment, in his administration. So his administration is fundamentally left. As a matter of fact, it's the furthest left that the United States has ever been. And so what happens is that you have another row again between the Republicans and the Democrats. The Republicans, who are typically on the right, and in many cases they're on now, if you want to look at the average Republican in the United States, the average Republican in the United States is actually can identify with nationalism. And nationalism is National Socialism. The German term for that is Nazi. Nazi means National Socialism. So this is where they are. This is where the Republicans currently sit. They're not supposed to be there. The Republicans are supposed to be, by definition, the GOP, government of the people, should be independent oriented. It should be based on independence, but it's not. Right now, it's swung socially to the right. So this is what I talk about social conservatism. When you hear someone talk about social conservatism, they're talking about a socialist organization. They're talking about socialism, but socialism on the right. And this is where you hear that they have the narrative coming, and this is where the Democrats oppose the discussion of illegal immigration. The person that was scheduled to speak was Bay Buchanan. Before then, you had the former GOP presidential candidate, Herman Cain. And both of these groups, both of these nominees were rejected for funding. As a matter of fact, the group itself has been denied funding for the rest of the year. So they're not able to get funding from the school, which in many ways is a good thing because it forces them to go out and be independent. The bad part is that this group, instead of going up and saying, we're going to be independent of this, we're not going to get, and use this as a protest point against welfare systems that give able-bodied people money. In other words, there's nothing wrong, I don't see anything wrong with helping somebody who needs help. But to demand help, to have people who don't want to work, who don't want to be employed, to have these people come up and demand that have X amount of dollars simply because they want it or they feel that they deserve it, well, that's wrong. Taking money, no matter who it's by or who you're taking it from, is wrong. It's still theft. And there is no differentiation between the government or the individual person. Governments are not exempt from right and wrong, from the morals that they think they are. It is not moral to steal from somebody, no matter what necessity you attach it to. Anyways, we're going to come back in a few minutes, like a few seconds, and we'll continue on with our narrative. All right, take it easy.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Alrighty, welcome back. We're going to continue on with our narrative. We're talking about the difference between the right and left, and then that neither side is fundamentally exempt. Or people should, if you're really a person who believes in independence, with no kings above us and no serfs below us. If this is what you actually believe, then there isn't a separation between the morality of the people and the morality of the government. Although this is actually what's going on now, the reality is that there is a separation of morality between the government and the people. And the government, ironically enough, falls within the term of biblical evil. So we can actually call politicians fundamentally evil. Even though they may claim to be Christians, the government itself, including the people who work for the government, fall within this definition of biblical evil. And they actually you can sort of see the narrative of the publican that you see in the Pharisee in the story of the Pharisee and the publican within the Bible. If you go into that chapter there, you'll see the similarities between what's going on today and what was going on back then. And then this is sort of how you can sort of draw the line, the parallel that politicians and the people who work for the government are fundamentally evil. They're biblically evil because they're involved in this stuff. And one of the things is this is where you see this, and you see this on both sides. This whole narrative of illegal immigration, and we talked about this town in last episode. Talked about a tiny town in New Mexico that moved 420 illegal immigrants out of a facility. They were holding these people, right? And the thing is, the article is misleading because they say 420 illegal immigrants. They're not telling you that they've captured whole families. They've got children incarcerated, jailed, in a border facility, in a border patrol training, in a border control. Border Patrol training facility. They're held up in a training facility for Border Patrol agents, and so they're proud about having to use government, the sort of the president's executive order to move these residents into a new, basically state-built prison. In other words, they moved them into a proper prison. But they don't call it a prison. They call it a residential facility. But it's got barbed wire. It's got guards. They're not allowed to leave the facility, the residential facility. They're in prison. And the ironic thing is that this was shown on Alex Jones. And they were saying, well, this is where ordinary Americans are going to be put into. They're saying that these are the new facilities being built for Americans. No, they're not being built for Americans. They're there. They're already housing these people. They're housing whole families in there. And what you see is, behind barbed wire, you see a playground for children. And that tells you that in this prison, that there were children in this prison, that they think the people who are running this thing, who promoted this thing, who built this thing, the government believes that incarcerating children is right. And these children haven't committed any crimes. They're simply here illegally. In other words, the country that believes in freedom of motion, freedom of information, freedom of association, finds that because a person is in a particular place geographically without the proper legal permit, in other words, you have to have a legal permit to move around the United States now. If you don't have the right permits, the right permission from the government, you are now illegal. And as an illegal person, as an illegal being, right, because you're not legal, right, you don't meet the proper paper definitions, you don't have the right papers, you're going to be put in jail now. Does this sound moral to you? Is this what a moral Christian Republican should be thinking? No. And so there goes people wonder why they view Republicans, particularly the Christian right, as hypocrites. Well, look at it. All you have to do is look at what's going on. Ask yourself the question: would Christ incarcerate children? Would he put them in jail because they're not legally in a particular place? No. I mean, Christ was all about breaking the rules. Look, all you have to do is read. If you read the gospel, you fundamentally understand what's going on in the gospel. You know that Christ, the entire time Christ was around, was breaking down the rules and saying that the people who had authority did not have authority. That only God has the authority. And that these people created their own authority, and that that he as God could break these authority, these rules, could go against them. And this is exactly what the whole gospel was about this. So when you talk about the Christian fundamentalists, there's nothing fundamental about these Christian right at all. Because they're not fundamentally Christian. Where do you see their behavior in terms of the Christian fundamentals? You don't see them in Christianity. You don't see them in Christ, in terms of the early form of the church, in the early Christian church. The early Christian church went to their graves as martyrs. They were peaceful martyrs. They didn't go around blowing people up. They didn't go around shooting people. They didn't have a Christian army going in and wiping out whole villages. When they went to their graves as Christian martyrs, they went peaceful. They were peaceful activists, if you will. And this flies completely against what we see in the Christian narrative today. And if the Christian narrative is fundamentally against the early Christian church, what Christ was teaching, the way Christ behaved, then they are not fundamentally Christian. So what are they? Where do you see this? You see this in a pagan culture. You see this in the pagan world. But the only difference between this new Christian right and this sort of new Christianity that evolved from about 1000 AD on is simply Christianity, or pagan. It's Christianity that is really paganism. Christianity is the front, is the face, and behind it is paganism. So it is a pagan. It's a Christian face paganism. And so in other words, it's a Christian paganism type of religion. It is not Christianity, and therefore you cannot really use the term, even though they're using the term, they give themselves the term Christian fundamentalists. They're not really fundamental in terms of being Christian. They are fundamental in being pagans about it, and asserting their rights, and asserting their might and right, but they're certainly not fundamentally Christians. And this is going to be seen once again, because people talk about, well, you really can't have all these people from South America here illegally. Well, the thing is, are they here illegally? And the thing is, why are these people coming up? Well, they don't want to work in their countries. Well, no. And then someone will say, well, look at the communist Che Guevara, right? There's one of these communist people who was instrumental in these communist revolutions in South America. What they don't tell you, this guy was responsible for dictatorships. He was responsible for a lot of deaths that popped up across South America. But the thing is, the right, and even the democratic government, and so it was both left and right in America, participated in military juntas. They participated in dictatorships. They participated. Both sides participated in death squads. You can see this in Guatemala. You can see this in Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Peru, all over South America. The United States has been actively, since basically 1940, involved in overthrowing one government after another that does not lend itself or become a puppet of the United States. And it's done this in Iran too. Iran is the way it is because the United States went in there and began overthrowing its government. Any government that was not favorable to the United States was overthrown. They were doing this in Africa. This is what's going on in Africa. You wonder why Africa is such a mess? Well, you've got all the United States in there, along with Europe, promoting a white-based face for Africa. An African politician, an African leader is acceptable to the West only if only if they are faithful to the West. In other words, if a Western leader is a puppet, if an African leader is a puppet of the United States, will do anything that Europe wants to do, yes. As soon as they are not of this type, they are now evil and must be overthrown. This is the narrative that goes on. And the thing is, so you can see this again. You can see this popping up again. This sort of the support for dictatorships in Ukraine. You can see it in Syria in terms of its support for these to overthrow these groups. The United States is openly supporting Nazi groups in Syria. They're openly supporting jihadists. And yet at the same time, they come up and say, "Well, we can't really be supporting Iran with all this. Who knows what they might do." The thing is that the United States is doing the exact same thing. And the thing is, around this whole thing here, And this is even, you'll even see this on Alex Jones, who is this conspiracy theorist. Well, he's missing certain narratives in his articles, and this includes the Young Turks. What are they missing? Well, let's go to an Israeli paper to understand what's happening. Ignoring Israeli apartheid. And this is a whole section of articles from the newspaper Haaretz. This is a Jewish newspaper. It's published in Israel. They talk about a Facebook protest by a group of Palestinians and Israelis who support Arab-Palestinian relationship, who openly support Arab-Palestinian friendship in terms of peace and everything. These are peace groups. And they have a stamp on their Facebook page that says second-class citizen. And what a lot of people don't know, because it's simply not put up in the press here, that in the United States and Canada and in Europe, that the Palestinian people, the Arab Israelis, are treated as second-class. They do not have the same rights as Israeli. And we talk about this whole narrative, and we listen to the narrative, and we hear the politicians go up and say that we have to respect Israel as a nation of Jews. That Israel is the Jewish nation state. And a lot of people don't necessarily realize what's going on here, is that this is fundamentally racist. That this is what creates the apartheid system. That only Jews are first-class citizens of the United States, of Israel. And everybody else is secondary. They are, in Israeli terms, and in Judaic terms, they are goyim. So basically, in the Judaic belief, there are Jews, those are the real people, and then below the Jews are the goyim, and the goyim is anyone who is not Jewish. And this actually comes out in the paper here, right? I'll read you several bylines here. New York's Jewish Theological Seminary head, alarmed by Israel's Jewish nation-state bill. Chancellor Arnold Eisen urges Israeli parliamentarians not to relegate countries and minorities to a second-class status. This is actually from the paper here. These are quotes. Second quote here. The nation-state bill, Jews should know exactly where it leads. One needs not to be a historian to see the resemblance between the controversial bill and the nationality laws of 1930s Europe. They're talking about Nazism. And they're talking about actually what's going on now. A lot of what's going on now, the sort of nationalist thing, the anti-immigration thing, anti-illegal immigration thing, this is all a Nazi narrative. There's a swing now to the social right. They're not independents, they're moving to the social right now. And they're using a lot of terms, couch terms, to bring about the Nazism that was around before. So history is being repeated here. And then the next comment, the next quotation. Welcome diaspora Jews, right? To the Israel you've been avoiding. For too long, diaspora Jews have been defending an imaginary Israel. The real one looks much more like the one described in the controversial nation-state bill. In other words, where you have second-class citizens, third-class citizens, where you have fundamentally an apartheid state, right? Then the last one I have here, which is very powerful. Netanyahu is turning Jerusalem into the new Tehran. The racist downpours that have fallen on Israel lately are only the first rains of a long winter of racism to come. One that will flood Israel for years to come. They understand what's happening here. And these aren't Americans. These aren't anti-Jewish people. These aren't anti-Semitic. This is the voice of many of the Israeli public. And the comments that accompanies these quotes are equally telling of that the Jewish society, Israeli society, is not united on this thing. Yet this is exactly what you see in the newspapers. You see that they are united. And our time is up, and when we come back, we will talk more about this. We'll continue on, and we'll go on into the evil, the psychology of evil.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
All right, welcome back. This is the way the camera works. You got only 15-minute segments here. We were talking about the Israeli apartheid. That Israeli apartheid is missing from Alex Jones's narrative. Is missing from the Young Turks narrative. Is missing from most of the narrative in Europe and in North America. And what happens here, and this is where you see, if you go into Alex Jones, you go into a lot of these conspiracy theorists, and these sort of the so-called alternative media. What you'll see is a narrative popping up that the Aryan nation can really use. That Jews are fundamentally racist. That they hate the Palestinians, that they're there to destroy and wipe out the Palestinians. And all of a sudden you have the left papers, a lot of these that are supported by the various different Jewish groups in the United States, will pop up and say, well, there's another anti-Semite. And both sides will go back and forth talking about this narrative, but neither side will point to the Israeli papers, neither side will point to the Israeli public and show that there is a difference in opinion, that not all Jews feel this way, that not all Israelis feel this way. And the thing is, not Israelis want to be called Jews. Jew has a reference particularly to a particular religious mindset. If you're not religious, then you're not a Jew. If you're an atheist, you're not a Jew. You're an Israeli, you're a Hebrew, but you're not a Jew. A Jew refers specifically to a specific religious state, a religious being, a religious existence. If you're not of that existence, then you're not a Jew. And this is what particularly worries some of the sort of the Israelis and some of these Hebrews who do not have religious ties. In other words, if you're an atheist and you believe in that there's no God, then you do not have ties. You are not fundamentally, you're not defined as a Jew. You can't be, because the Jew has that fundamental religious definition. And this sort of leads us into sort of the psychology of things, the psychology of evil. And we see that in many cases that if one group of the evil group becomes powerful enough, that they will drown out and seek to silence dissent in any manner possible. And in that effect, in that sort of what we call the Lucifer effect, they can get good people who are moral and principle, or feel they're moral and principle, to do things, evil things that they would not ordinarily do, simply because, one, they don't feel that there's any way they can stop it, and then two, they feel that, well, I'm simply doing my job. And this is actually if you hear the narrative of the bureaucracy that sent all the people to the death camps, and I'll go into this in a minute. This is exactly what you hear. You say, "Oh, I was simply doing my job. I didn't want to do this, but I was told to do this. I didn't know what was going on." Right? That was the argument. And I say people because, again, we're dealing with a narrative here. There are many groups who will say, oh, they were Jews, but they weren't Jews. They were Jews. If you listen to the Nazi rhetoric and the Nazi line, they were Jews, they were Slavs, they were Gypsies. There were a whole variety of groups of people who were unacceptable. They were not genetically pure enough to be alive, and these people need to be eliminated. But of course, they didn't eliminate them right away because they could use them for labor or whatever, and so on and so forth. In other words, they were repeating history, what was done in the Industrial Revolution. The Roman Catholic Church decided that certain people didn't need to be baptized or fully baptized because they weren't going to be saved anyways, and the people that would be half baptized, and you can read this in Charles Dickens, they would be half baptized and then sent out to work farms or in workhouses. They would work in these industrial mills, and this included children. And this was the sort of narrative to get around this. In the English society, the non-Catholics, there were a group of Protestants called the Calvinists. The Calvinists believed that God smiled on them, and that if they were wealthy enough, because God smiles on you, that then therefore you were saved. And that the people who were down below you, who were poor, well, they were poor because they were cursed by God. And there's no problem because, you're rich, you're wealthy, you're saved. God is smiling on you. Why not work these poor people who are beneath you, who are cursed, work them to death? trade them as slaves. And most of your slave traders were indeed Calvinists, right? And probably a few Catholics along the way. The thing is, this narrative later changed, but the overall view of the Calvinists is still there. It just changes in different ways. And then this sort of leads us into our whole thing, our whole topic of psychology and evil, and how moral ethics and choices really pop up. And this can actually be seen in Michael Brown. We're talking about Michael Brown and Ferguson. You look at the evidence. The evidence is that there really wasn't enough evidence that really charged the police with murder. What happened was unfortunate, but if you go into the history of policing, you look at policing all across the United States, or even in Canada, where you have a mentally ill person with a knife, and you have 6 officers emptying their guns out at this person, simply because, well, the guy's armed with a knife, what are we going to do? And it's not that that's the view from the police. The reality is that the police are being trained as paramilitary officers. They have paramilitary training. And this is the narrative that you hear in Alex Jones. This is what you hear in Glenn Beck. This is actually the narrative you hear from NRA supporters, that the police are being militarily trained. In other words, the NRA is saying, hey, wait a minute here. Yeah, we have a systematic problem with the police. It's not about race. It's about the overarching control that the police have been given. In this narrative, the control that the police have been given, the authority that the police have been given, was pointed out early on in the 1970s in the Stanford experiment, that is now basically known as the experiment that looks at the psychology of evil. This was done by Dr. Philip Zimbardo. He actually gave a TED talk on his experiment, how it related to Abu Ghraib and what happened in Abu Ghraib. You can actually see Abu Ghraib. You can see the Stanford experiment. If you've done the research, you can see that easily within Ferguson. That Ferguson wasn't an issue of race, not a black versus white thing. It is a state control. It is a psychology of evil thing that when you give people a power and authority, if you don't have the right oversight, if you don't have the right limits on there, these people go mad with power, and they'll use this power inappropriately. And it's not an issue of black and white. It's an issue of power and control. And what happens when authority is given out in a blanket form? And this is what we see. But what happens? We see that both sides have had massive protests. You have sides from nationalist groups going out and protesting. The biggest protests are from the left. And what are they doing? What do you see with the left protesters? You see vandalism. You see stores burning to the ground. You see looters. And the ironic thing is that the right will come up and they pointed to a particular we'll call a charge sheet. There's a charge sheet that you can go on the internet. You go out to the courts. The courts will tell you what charges people have been charged with, and you can see it. That's all there. And they found a charge sheet for Michael Brown, and all across the internet, everyone was talking about it. Anyone who was on the right was talking about it. How Michael Brown was charged with theft. He was charged with aggravated violence. He was charged with armed robbery. He was charged with assault and battery, and which was beating people up. He was a violent person. They said, "Oh, look at this! See, Michael Brown was violent. Look at these guys are criminals." But that's if you can find that only if you read the particular charge sheet. If you look at the more telling sheet, is to see whether or not you're actually talking about this Michael Brown that was in Ferguson, the one that was shot. You have to look at the court docket. When you look at the court docket, which is also available, it's another tab over, and most people didn't look at the court docket, you'll begin to realize that there's something on here. Because after Michael Brown was shot and killed in August 9, the court case for Michael Brown that we're talking about, the charges, continued on. But wait a minute here. How does a court case for Michael Brown, who is deceased, continue on when Michael Brown is deceased? He's dead. The only way that could happen is if they're talking about another Michael Brown. But here's how both the left and the right will take things they'll skew them. They won't pay attention to the details. They won't go and dig. And a narrative will form where both sides of the argument are wrong, because neither side has looked at all the details of what's actually going on. And so what happens is you get the other people now, like Reverend Al Sharpton and these other political groups who are getting paid for all this stuff. You know, people don't understand. When Reverend Al Sharpton and his groups host a rally like that, they're making money. This is their bread and butter. This is how they earn their living. This is their profit margin. And the same thing with the news. The news, when they're covering these things, they're covering these stories, they have the best ratings they ever have. This Ferguson and the protest that resulted from this the whole outcome couldn't have been better for the news company. Their ratings went up. And as their ratings went up, the charge sheets, the amount they charge for commercials, because it's based on ratings, went up as well. When 9/11 happened, the profits for CNN and all these other news corporations went up, not down. Why? Because the number of people who switched their channels from watching regular TV, to watching news, they went through the roof. People were watching news, CNN, and all these other channels all day long. They couldn't get enough of it. And as that was happening, the ratings went up for CNN. The commercial prices went up for CNN. And CNN and all this, and not CNN alone, but all the other news agencies made a lot of money off of this. And what you see here is you see people openly enjoying and profiting, profiting off the misery and the tragedies of others. And this is where you see, once again, evil coming into the world, evil coming into our livelihood, and it's accepted as normal. No one thinks that, hey, wait a minute here, I'm profiting from this. This is wrong. This is evil. No one said this was wrong. And you see this, in the sort of the entertainment news broadcast, where they talk about Anna Nicole Smith, or they talk about what's her name, Britney Spears, or any of these other, or what's it called? It's on the tip of my tongue. Lindsay Lohan. These people, they're profiting from this person's misery. And so this is what we're going to look into now. We're going to continue on looking into the psychology of evil and looking at pedophiles and pedophile teachers. That how pedophilia has worked its way so far into society that we are now on the verge of becoming a psychopathic society. A society that no longer cares or even understands what is right and what is wrong. And it's very difficult for those who are moral to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong. You'll see this in the narratives against rape. You'll see this in narratives against anything that people don't like what's happening in certain cases that are sort of, people realize this is evil. The issue of morality never comes into the narrative, although it should have. And because you don't have the narrative of morality, that's gone, you now are seeing a psychopathic society. And we see this first in the charges against the charges and the allegations against Bill Cosby. And people will, well, we were surprised by this. Well, how are you surprised? Bill Cosby has a Playboy t-shirt on in many cases. He's been often at the Playboy Mansion. Do you expect Bill Cosby, who hangs out with people who are in the Playboy, to be moral, to be non-sexual? No. Use your common sense here. And the thing is that people will say, "Wow, we're surprised. We didn't." This is the same narrative that came out of the German people when they saw the pictures of what was going on in Auschwitz, in the concentration camp. Well, we didn't know. We weren't told what was going on. We were simply doing our jobs. Well, if we could look back and look at the narratives that were going on, they did know. They simply didn't want to know. They could have known. This is the definition of ignorance. Ignorance is not what you don't know. Ignorance is what you choose not to know. Ignorance is willful blindness. And when we come back, we're going to continue on this theme. We're going to end our broadcast here on the last segment here. And we'll talk about this, how it's working its way into the school systems now. That evil is now, and psychopathy is now working its way into the school systems.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Alright, but we're back. It does take us time. The breaks are necessary because it's cold in here. I keep my place a little cold, and sometimes my nose gets a little runny. And, I take the breaks to sort of wipe my nose and do other business the human nature part of existing often is required during the break. So, well, anyway, we're talking about the evolution of morale of evil, the growth of evil in society, and how psychopathic societies are grown. As at first, it begins with the adults. We see this going on with the adults. Then, as the adults become more and more comfortable with the immorality, as they become more and more psychopathic, they don't see it as evil to begin teaching children to behave the exact same way. And we see this in Hollywood. Before we go to the politicians, we see this in Hollywood as a common narrative. We see what happened to Miley Cyrus. We see what happened to Lindsay Lohan. We see what happened to Britney Spears. We see the number that almost every Disney star, the child star, particularly girls, will go up and do these very sexual poses. Matter of fact, you have entry-level sexual magazines in the exact manner of grooming for a pedophile. You have these magazines out there like Maxim and FM. These are essentially entry-level Playboy brands. They're entry-level porn. And it's fine for a 17-year-old, for an 18-year-old to go into these magazines and start taking their clothes off. And this magazine culture like this called pop culture. And a lot of the kids that look up to this say, wow, this is great. So there's no problem now at 17, 18 taking your top off, taking your clothes off. And you see this in Next Top Model. You see it in most of the modeling shows that the sexuality that is there is sort of couched, but it's an entry-level type of thing. It's a grooming type of thing. If you understand the psychology of sexual abuse and how abusers groom their victims to think that what's happening to them is normal and okay. And you see, this is exactly what's happening in Hollywood. And is it later on, what happens is you see these mental breakdowns. I mean, we go back and look at the psychology of sex abuse and what happens when a person is sexually abused. What happens later on in life when they start having these mental breakdowns. And we see this. We saw this in the mental breakdown of Lindsay Lohan. People say, why is she doing what she's doing? She must be on drugs. Well, yes, she is on drugs, but need to remember that Lindsay Lohan, before she was Lindsay Lohan in the papers and in the articles the way she was a normal teenage girl in Hollywood. What happened? Well, for those of you who don't know, she went on SNL, Saturday Night Live. This was her big ticket to, she was in the process of leaving Disney. She was growing up. She was going to go show how she was growing up. And they did, the SNL with Jimmy Fallon did a whole show about her being Hermione. And the big joke about Hermione is that they gave her a low-cut top and a pushed-up bra and showed that her breasts had become larger. And it was later known, because Jimmy Fallon came out and stated this, that on the set of Saturday Night Live, Jimmy Fallon, behind the scenes, molested Lindsay Lohan. And I'm going to use the term molested. I'm not going to couch it in any other term. He had sex with her. But he did exactly what all the guys do. He went out, he had sex with her, and then, and I would say molested her, and then told everybody about it. And so Lindsay Lohan went from being a teen girl and into her 20s, at that point there, 18, 19-year-old, went from a teen girl to being a slut. And she became everybody's slut. And then you started seeing that people, other like Christian Slater and other people, actually started going into her trailer. They were seen coming out of her trailer. In other words, she had her childhood could be seen as something that this is a person who's going to become a victim of sexual abuse. You can see this in her history. You can see this in the history, the parental history of Britney Spears. You can see that history there. The family background is where you will expect sexual abuse to emerge from, and where you'll get your victims from. And so what happens? You see an attack on this person. And the same thing with Anna Nicole Smith. By society, and they call it the term now slut shaming. Slut shaming. And the thing is, they were enjoying it. The mainstream society was enjoying. This was selling articles. People couldn't get enough of this stuff, and it was seen as acceptable. And the thing is, another person just recently went out and did a movie called An Open Secret. Her name is Amy Berg, and presents the idea that, and she was shocked that many people, many educated people couldn't understand what was wrong about a young girl being sexualized, a young girl becoming a target of sexual activity, being groomed in that manner. And so she went and explored this. You know, she said, and this is one of her quotes: "Smart people I spoke to showed this kind of bias towards these kids. These are Hollywood kids. About what happened, that they were this was a quid pro quo. This was the old casting couch. You sleep with me and I give you a job. This was, you trade a sex for your frame. Right? This was the narrative, the Hollywood narrative. As a matter of fact, the casting couch is not unknown. You can see this in movies like Coal Miner's Daughter about Loretta Lynn. She was sexualized at an age of 16 years old to get into the music industry. This was something that is sort of a secret that's been known about from way back. And the thing is, you don't have to go that. You don't really have to go far back. All you have to do is go look into some of the names here, like Corey Feldman, Corey Haim, or Mackenzie Phillips. Look at Mackenzie Phillips back up. People are saying, "Oh, how could her dad do it? How this must be a lie." Well, what do we know about sexual abuse? Let's go into the psychology of sexual abuse. We know that it occurs among drug use and alcohol abuse. What was going on? Where was she when she was molested? Well, she was getting high doing heroin with her dad. This is known. This was the 60s. This was the drug culture. This was the love culture. And open sexuality during the love culture did not have age boundaries. You will find this in the LSD experiments. If you go into the history of LSD and you go into the documentary showing LSD experiments, you'll find young girls involved with older men during the LSD experiments. The LSD experiments were there to expand and open your mind, to explore new experiences. And one of the experiences was doing LSD and having sex at the same time. That this would sort of open your mind up. But we see what happens after this. And the thing is, this story of rape, of molestation, the way Jimmy Fallon, this goes back to Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski did the same thing to a 13-year-old girl. But no one calls it rape. They go, well, they had sex, and that was about it. And then you have a view in society that, you know what, sex is okay. And this actually comes out of Europe. The European view is, the only problem with rape is that we are a sexually repressed society, and that if we were more open sexually, then rape wouldn't be an issue. In other words, women need to get over themselves. You're not too good to have sex. If someone wants to have sex, you should be flattered that they have sex with you, because this is what nature does. This is the way nature is. This is something that's natural. But I think it's not natural. All you have to do is look at animal society and go actually do a study in animal behavior. And I'm not talking about from a textbook. I'm actually talking about going out and doing the research in about animal society, sitting down and learning about animal society from observation, going out, making the movies, filming an animal society, filming animal behavior, and you'll see that there are very specific rules. That it's not open this and that. That there are very specific rules in society, that they have these particular rules. And so this narrative that, it's all open and natural, this is bullshit. And the thing is, to understand that this is what's happening in schools now, it shouldn't be, a surprise. And she was surprised that, you have people from Disney, you have people from Disney, you have people from major studios having sex parties where they're flying in. And these are convicted sex offenders. And the thing is, when you're a convicted sex offender, it's not a bad thing. You're given a low-level sentence. I mean, you're given a low-level sentence, and that's about it. And there's no 3 strikes you're out. There's no life incarceration for jail. Incarceration for life, jail for life. There's nothing like that. It's just basically a fine, a small fine, and maybe a couple months in jail, and that's about it. And so the low levels of consequences means that sexual abuse is no big deal. And the thing is, you'll find this throughout Hollywood. You'll find this in the major motion studios, and you'll even find a sexual offender, a registered sexual offender, on the set of the Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. You know, X-Men 2, X-Men. And the thing is, you would expect pedophiles. You would expect pedophiles to be around children. So where are the pedophiles going to be? They're not going to be in adult movies. They're going to be around the kids' movies. They're going to be in the kids' studios. That's what they're going to be, because that's what they're looking for. And we see this on both, for both. This is not gay or straight. This is for both. Whether gay or straight, you have pedophiles inside the kids' studios, inside children hall. And the thing is, why is nobody looking at it? Because, people think that it's normal. And to give you an idea of how well that people think this is normal, all you have to do is take a look at what's going on in Ontario. And this Ontario is not much of anything different than what's going on elsewhere in the school boards. You have a premier who is openly sexual, and she has been known to be openly sexual. And I would argue that she's a sexual predator. But no one really particularly cares, because that's not what the narrative. The narrative is, and this is from a Parents as First Educators group. This is a Catholic group who is headlining or spearheading a move to morality, saying that sexualizing kids is wrong. We don't want our children sexualized, but she's not. What happens if you look at the narrative? And a lot of people signed up. I signed the petition because I don't think kids should be sexualized. But they're missing the point here, and this is one of the reasons why they're missing the point, because they're Catholic. Teachers and even the premier, they're pedophiles. They don't understand that sexualizing children is wrong. What's going on in the schools is exactly what pedophiles do to groom their children. There's no difference. People say, well, you can't call her a pedophile. Well, if she's grooming children for sexual activity, she's a pedophile. And if teachers are doing the same thing, the school board is doing the same thing, the union is doing the same thing, then they're pedophiles. Well, there are good teachers there. Yes, there are good teachers there. But look at the Stanford University experience. Look at the psychology of evil. In these situations, more often than not, the moral people don't stand up. They don't say this is wrong. They don't do anything about it. It takes somebody from the outside to come in and say, hey, this is wrong, and that way you can start getting a movement. But if society itself is moving towards a direction of being psychopaths, then it's going to be very difficult to stop. And one of the problems is compromise. Here she is, a Catholic teacher, a Catholic person, in a Catholic group, trying to say the sexualization is wrong, but she can't talk about the morality of pedophilia because of what the Catholic Church did. The Catholic Church's record on child sex abuse is not exemplary. It's contradictory. It undermines the argument that children should be left alone, that children should not be sexualized. And so what happens is that a lot of these things are sort of just being ignored. And the full narrative of what needs to come out, what needs to be talked about, is not being talked about. And the thing is, the Toronto School Board has known about this for a long time. This is just now coming up, but they've also gone into this whole thing about gender identity. And they've already put in policies in place to make this whole gender issue a sexual issue. This includes in the whole bullying campaign. The bullying campaign is about sexuality. It's not about being about bullies. It's about sexuality. It's about sexualizing children. It's a form of pedophilia. If you read the actual documentation on this, you'll see that it's about pedophilia. It's not about allowing people to have the proper choices. It is not about protecting children. It is about open sexualization. It's about saying that there's nothing wrong with what's going on. And you'll see this in parents, too. Parents will say, well, there's nothing wrong with being sexual. And I will be bringing forward more of this. There are parents who will actually be proud of this, that their children are sexual. And this is the hallmark of a psychopathic society. And we will once again see a dictator like Stalin and Hitler, because this is where the society is going. Anyways, I will see you in our next episode in a couple days. This is continuing. I'll see you then. Have a good day. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras, and you're watching Headlines and Beyond on iNN. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian.
I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.